The theory of geographical determinism claims that climate, terrain, natural resources, and the physical environment shape social structures, cultural norms, and even the psychological traits of populations. Montesquieu wrote about the influence of climate on the temperament of nations. Ratzel developed ideas about space as the foundation of statehood, and Huntington linked economic development to temperature zones. If mountains isolated communities and created patriarchal clans, if arid steppes gave rise to nomadic thinking, if access to the sea defined a trading mentality, then the human being becomes a passive recipient of geographical conditions. Determinism in its rigid form deprives us of agency, the capacity to act as autonomous subjects who make decisions independently of external circumstances. Modern neuroscience shows that our brain is formed through the interaction between genetic programming and the environment. Neuroplasticity proves that synaptic connections change under the influence of experience. But does that mean experience completely determines us? Epigenetics demonstrates how external factors activate or suppress certain genes, yet the question remains, who makes the decision in the moment of choice? Geography creates the parameters of the possible, but within those parameters, a person is capable of creative adaptation. The Netherlands turned its struggle with the sea into engineering mastery and social cooperation. Singapore, without natural resources, built a knowledge-based economy. Israel made the desert a center of agriculture through innovations in irrigation. These examples show that geographical limitations can become a catalyst for human ingenuity, not a verdict. Spinoza, who polished lenses in Amsterdam, understood this dialectic better than most. His concept of conatus, the striving of each thing to preserve its being, describes an active force that resists external circumstances. In Spinoza's view, the human is determined by a chain of causes, but the degree of freedom grows with the understanding of those causes. Geography may determine initial conditions, yet reason can transform limitation into material for creativity. The canals of Amsterdam became the physical embodiment of this philosophy, where necessity turned into beauty through conscious action. The problem lies deeper. If we admit that geography influences us, how can we distinguish that influence from our free choice? Philosopher Dennett speaks about compatibilism, the concept that reconciles determinism with free will. According to this logic, freedom exists as the ability to act according to internal motives, even if those motives are shaped by external factors. We are free because our decisions arise from our desires and convictions, though those desires have a causal history. But does such freedom satisfy us? If my values are shaped by the landscape in which I grew up, the culture that landscape produced, and the economic opportunities that geography provided or withheld, then my autonomy looks like an illusion. We seem to be playing a chess game, choosing moves from available options, but the board, pieces, and rules were set by geography. Modern sociology proposes the concept of structure and agency, where human behavior is understood as the result of interaction between social structures and individual action. Pierre Bourdieu introduces the notion of habitus, a system of dispositions formed by social experience and, at the same time, creating room for individual variation. Geography becomes part of these structures, constraining and guiding, yet leaving space for maneuver. Responsibility gains special significance in this framework. If a person is determined by geography and society, can we still blame them for their actions? Criminal law is based on the assumption of mens rea, the guilty mind, implying conscious choice. But neuropsychology shows that decisions are formed in the subcortex milliseconds before consciousness registers them. Libet's experiments demonstrated that brain activity precedes conscious decision-making by about 1/3 of a second. Nevertheless, society functions system of responsibility. We hold people accountable because it's the only way to maintain social order and encourage desirable behavior. Foucault, in Discipline and Punish, showed how responsibility is constructed through power discourses. The geography of hospitals and schools creates spatial discipline that forms subjects capable of self-control. Bentham's panopticon, an architectural structure of total surveillance, materializes the idea of how physical space produces particular types of consciousness. When we speak about responsibility, We often ignore that the very capacity to feel responsible was formed by spatial and institutional practices. The theory of geographical determinism operates through bodies that learn to discipline themselves in organized space. Responsibility becomes not a metaphysical fact but a social practice. We behave as if people are free because the alternative would destroy the basic institutions of coexistence. Geographical determinism, in its rigid form, has already been rejected by science. Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel shows how geography created initial conditions, but cultural evolution and technology shifted the balance. Amartya Sen criticizes any form of determinism, emphasizing capabilities, the real opportunities people have to choose the kind of life they value. Poverty, hunger, and backwardness arise from a lack of freedom of choice. Geography here is context, not cause. Perhaps the question should be reframed. Instead of the dichotomy determinism or freedom, we should think in terms of gradients of autonomy. Geography sets external boundaries, culture and society create internal structure. But at every moment there is a space for personal choice, even if microscopic. Frankl in the concentration camps discovered that a person can choose their attitude even when all external freedoms are stripped away. This last freedom remains beyond the reach of any determinism. Sartre would call it radical freedom, both curse and gift. In the camp, where geography is reduced to an absolute minimum, the existential truth emerges. We are condemned to be free. Even when the external environment is totally controlled, the inner stance remains a space of choice. But Sartre goes further than Frankl, asserting that the refusal to choose is itself a choice for which we bear full responsibility. The theory of geographical determinism collapses before the face of this existential freedom, which exists even in the harshest constraints. But this knowledge produces anxiety, for it deprives us of excuses. Modern complexity lies in the fact that we live in an age when we understand causal chains more deeply than ever. Philosophy, genetics, neuroscience, psychology, sociology, and geography reveal the mechanisms that form us. But the more we know about determinants, the harder it becomes to sustain the sense of personal autonomy. The paradox is that it is precisely the knowledge of limitations that allows us to overcome them. Awareness of geographical influence enables us to consciously compensate for it through education, technology, and social innovation. The human being remains a creature suspended between determinism and freedom. We are shaped by geography, yet capable of transforming it. We are products of circumstances, but also their creators. This ambivalence defines the essence of human existence, where responsibility exists as an ethical necessity, even if its philosophical grounds remain uncertain. When we talk about forming the environment, we must understand the mechanism of feedback. Geography created you, but you create new geography through every decision that accumulates over time. An architect changes human flows through urban spaces. A programmer writes code that restructures economic chains. A farmer modifies the soil and the climate of a local ecosystem. These actions leave material traces that become new determinants for future generations. Consider the decision of where to live. Most people inherit their location from their parents, accepting it as given. But the choice of residence changes everything. Access to information, types of social connections, economic opportunities, cognitive stimuli. Neuroscience shows that the diversity of sensory experience increases dendritic spine density in the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for learning. Life in a metropolis activates certain neural networks through constant novelty and speed. Villages form others through deep local ties and seasonal rhythms. But the choice of location operates deeper than mechanical relocation. Every geographical point contains clusters of possibilities that unfold only through active interaction. Silicon Valley became an innovation hub through the concentration of capital, talent, and a culture of risk. Moving there grants access to this field, but only if you know how to activate it. Otherwise, you are merely physically present in a space that remains closed to you. The mechanism of formation works through repeated actions that crystallize into material structures. You write daily, and after a year, you have an archive of texts. You build relationships, and after 5 years, you have a network that generates opportunities. You study a technology, and after 10 years, your brain is physically rewired for that competence. These accumulations become your personal geography, determining your future trajectories. Nietzsche understood this as the will to power, expressed through self-overcoming and creativity. His amor fati, love of fate, paradoxically combines acceptance of circumstances with their transformation. You love what is so deeply that you gain the strength to change it. Zarathustra descends from the mountains to transform humanity, but first he had to climb them to transform himself. The geography of height becomes a metaphor for inner ascent. Every decision either brings you closer to the Übermensch, the being capable of creating values, or sinks you into herd morality, where the environment thinks for you. The difficulty lies in temporal delay. The decision you make today will show its full consequences years later. Most people experience the gap between actions and results as a lack of connection, and thus remain trapped in cycles of reactivity. Geographical determinism sets the trap. They see how the environment shapes them, but shaping their own environment requires investments with delayed returns, invisible in the short term. Here arises the concept of bifurcation points from chaos theory. Most of the time, the system moves predictably, but at certain moments, small changes, decisions, produce radically different trajectories. The choice of university, first job, partner, city, or project creates branches where one decision opens an entire field of possibilities, while another closes them. The problem is that in the moment of choice, you rarely realize which one is a crossroads. Thus, forming space requires a different type of attention. Instead of trying to control every variable, one must cultivate the ability to recognize potential crossroads and maximize optionality. Optionality means creating positions where you have multiple possible paths without commitment to one. Taleb calls this anti-fragility, but the essence is deeper. You build a structure that benefits from uncertainty. Deleuze and Guattari describe this through the concept of the rhizome, a nonlinear structure of connections that spreads horizontally without a center. Unlike the tree with rigid hierarchy, the rhizome can be broken at any point, yet regenerates through other connections. Such a structure of thought and action makes you resilient to constraints because you are not multiple, but singular. The nomad in their philosophy travels not so much physically as conceptually, creating lines of flight from determined territories. Optionality becomes a way of existence when you abandon rooted identity in favor of becoming. Practically, this looks like accumulating diverse competencies that can recombine. A programmer who understands design and economics can see opportunities invisible to a narrow specialist. A writer who has studied neuroscience and philosophy creates texts of a different depth. These combinations form unique cognitive niches where competition is lower and impact is greater. The geography of your mind becomes more important than physical geography. What concepts have you absorbed? What mental models do you use? What thought patterns limit your vision? The cognitive map determines which opportunities you are able to notice in reality. Two architects look at an abandoned urban lot. One sees a problem, the other sees potential for regeneration through social design. The difference lies in inner geography. The formation of new space occurs through building infrastructure for future decisions. You establish systems that automatically push you in the right direction. A designer of the environment arranges books so that the most valuable ones are in sight. An entrepreneur builds a team that compensates for his weaknesses. A writer creates rituals that protect time for deep work. These structures become personal geography that determines behavior more softly and effectively than sheer willpower. But the deepest level of formation works through the transformation of identity. Your identity acts as a filter of reality. Certain possibilities simply don't pass through it because they contradict the self-image. A person who thinks of themselves as an executor will ignore opportunities for initiative. A person who identifies with a particular social class will not see paths beyond it. The transformation of identity unlocks entire layers of reality that were previously invisible. The mechanism of identity change runs through experiences that contradict the current self-narrative. You do something untypical of you, and if the outcome is positive, the old narrative cracks. Repetition of such experiences gradually rebuilds self-perception. Neuropsychology calls this memory reconsolidation, the process by which old memories become plastic, and can be rewritten with new information. Heidegger spoke of thrownness into a situation where we find ourselves without choosing it, but existence consists in projecting ourselves forward. We are always already in a particular place, at a particular time, with a particular history. But authenticity arises when we consciously accept this thrownness and create a project of the future. Geography becomes a facticity from which there is no escape, yet Dasein, human being, exists as the possibility of being otherwise. Memory reconsolidation at the neural level mirrors the ontological structure of temporality. The past is formed and lives only through interpretation from the future we choose. Geographical determinism dissolves completely here. You no longer start from a fixed point to accept or overcome. You become a process of continuous reconfiguration, where every element of your environment can be rebuilt, including the basic assumptions of who you are. The boundary between you and space becomes permeable because you are forming a new space that, in turn, forms you through feedback cycles. The hardest thing in our Mentis code philosophy is to realize that freedom exists as the ability to rewrite the rules of the game, and only then as the choice within those rules. Most people play the game given to them by geography, culture, family. The shaper of new space understands that the game itself can be changed, but this requires rising to the meta level, where you see the construction of rules instead of their naturalness. This ascent is painful because it destroys the illusion of objectivity. It turns out that almost everything was an agreement, one that can be renegotiated. Postscriptum. The true secret of the freedom of new space lies on the surface. Genius is simply the willingness to see it.